First of all, I just want to clear something up. Are you sleeping in the office here?
I sometimes sleep in the office. There's a library that nobody goes to. There's a couch there, and I sleep there sometimes.
The reason why I think you've agreed to do this is because you wanted to talk about the first 6 months as chief executive owner of Twitter. So, how do you think it's gone?
I think reasonably well. I mean, we've seen some all-time highs in terms of total user time. So we passed 8 billion user minutes per day. The site works mostly, and we're doing it with a small fraction of the original, headcount. So,
I mean, you mentioned outages there. There have been several. Yeah. And we've actually spoken to an engineer who works at Twitter, and they said that the plumbing is broken here and it's on fire, and there could be problems at any minute. Do you accept that?
No, I mean, there have been a few outages, but not for very long, and it's currently working fine. At this point, I think we've got a pretty good handle on what makes Twitter work, and we're also doing it with 2 data centers instead of 3. But we've made so many improvements to the core algorithm. In some cases, we improved the core algorithm by 80%. So the actual CPU usage or computer usage is dramatically less. But the results speak for themselves. The system, despite being at all-time highs of usage, is fast. It's responsive. It's more responsive than it was before the takeover. And we've also added long-form tweets. We've added, you can now post videos up to 2 hours, and soon videos of any length. We're rolling out our subscriber programs so people can, content creators can actually make a living on Twitter by having some of their content behind a paywall. And we open source the algorithm, so there's transparency about what content gets shown versus not.
When you put that initial bid in, you then had a wobble. You kind of said, I actually don't want to buy Twitter anymore.
When I first made the offer, the response was the board adopted a poison pill. So they were like, hell no, you can't buy Twitter. We'd rather die. We'd like chew on cyanide before being bought. That was their initial response. And then they said, no, you must buy us. Gun to the head. You have to buy us.
You said that the reason was because of bots, because Twitter was filled with bots.
Well,
looking back at it now, was there a little bit of you that thought, actually, maybe I've overpaid. Actually, maybe I don't want to do this. I want to get out of this.
That was literally the issue. It's like let's say you buy a warehouse full of goods, and you're told that less than 5% of the goods in the warehouse are broken, But then you actually get the warehouse. You look into the warehouse, and it turns out actually 25% of the things are broken.
So then you changed your mind again and decided to buy it. Did you do that because you thought that a court would make you do that?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that is the reason.
So you then came into Twitter with a sync. What were your first impressions?
I thought, wow, this is a really nice office building. And
expensive.
Yes, a very expensive office building. At the point at which the company, the transaction closed, Twitter was tracking to lose over $3 billion a year. And so, and had $1 billion in the bank. So that's 4 months to death. So this is your starting position.
You also had to borrow quite a lot of money and pay interest on that too.
Well, that's why part of why it was the $3 billion run rate. So in rough numbers, a normal year Twitter would do, let's say $4.5 billion in revenue, $4.5 billion in cost. I mean, it was really kind of like a non-profit. They'd run it at roughly break even. But then the issue is that if you then add $1.5 billion in debt servicing and have a massive drop in revenue, which we did, which was partly cyclic and partly, political concerns and whatever. So revenue, call it dropped by over a third. It's not, and this is not just Twitter. Facebook and Google have also seen some significant advertising revenue declines. It's been a little higher at Twitter, but most of the advertisers are coming back. So I think we'll be back where there's a cyclic demand drop, which is still pretty significant. But in rough numbers, revenue dropped from $4.5 billion to $3 billion, and expenses went from $4.5 billion to $6 billion, creating a $3 billion negative cash flow situation and Twitter having $1 billion in the bank. That's 4 months to live. So unless drastic action was taken immediately, this company's going to die.
Let's talk about that drastic action, because almost immediately you sacked a lot of Twitter workers. And I spoke to them, and the way they said, pretty much everyone said, is that it felt quite haphazard.
It was.
And it felt a little bit uncaring.
The company's either going to go bankrupt, or if we do not cut costs immediately. This is not a caring, uncaring situation. It's like if the whole ship sinks, then nobody's going to drive.
But a lot of people just lost their jobs like that.
What would you do?
A little bit of notice, you know.
No, I understand. If you have 4 months to live, 120 days. In 120 days, you're dead. So what do you...
How much are you worth?
I don't know.
You're quite a rich man.
I sold a lot of Tesla stock to close this deal. I did not want to sell the Tesla stock. So there are only brief windows where I can sell Tesla stock. And then this is often taken as some lack of faith in Tesla. The people couldn't parse the difference between I'm selling Tesla stock because I've lost faith in Tesla, which I haven't, or that it's desperately needed for Twitter.
And then after that, he started making some more policy decisions. One of those policy decisions was to bring Donald Trump back. He hasn't actually tweeted yet.
Right.
Do you expect him to come back at any point? Like, have you spoken to him?
I haven't spoken to him. I don't know. He may or may not come back. But the point is that Twitter should be a town square that gives equal voice to the whole country and ideally the whole world. It should not be a partisan politics. In order for something to serve as a digital town square, it must serve all people from all political persuasions, provided it's legal. So close to half the country voted for Trump. I wasn't one of them. I voted for Biden. But nonetheless, free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. And if at the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
I think the issue some people have is that a lot of people were brought back. Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Well, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC? The BBC itself has, at times, published things that are false.
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true.
Yes. Even if you aspire to be accurate, there are times when you will not be.
But you accept there has to be a line in terms of hate speech. I mean, you're not looking at total 100% unrestricted speech.
If the people of a given country are against a certain type of speech, they should talk to their elected representatives and pass a law to prevent it. So, for example, you cannot advocate murdering someone. That's illegal in the United States, everywhere, really, I suspect. So there are limits to speech.
Do you accept that there's more misinformation on the platform if it's not being policed in the same way?
I actually think there's less these days because we've eliminated so many of the bots which were pushing scams and spam. And previous management turned a blind eye to the bots because their bonuses were tied to user growth. And if your compensation is tied to user growth, well, you're not going to look too closely at some of the users. That's part of the problem. So I think we've got less misinformation because we don't have the bot problem that we used to do. And we also have given a lot of attention to community notes, which corrects, with community itself, corrects misinformation. It's been very effective.
We've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech.
I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
Personally, for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content. I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm
Well,
saying.
I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. And I'm asking for specific examples.
Honestly,
You can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that For You feed anymore because I just don't particularly like it.
But you
And
said
actually, a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at
hang on a second.
my
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen the For You hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying.
Then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet. And yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed...
You just lied.
What I claimed was there are many organizations that say that that kind of information is on the rise. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
Wow.
COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation
Has
rules.
BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter. You changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, it then disappeared. Why do that?
COVID is no longer an issue. Does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations? And not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, you thought it wasn't?
Let's talk about something else. Narendra Modi, the BBC did a documentary about Narendra Modi and his leadership during the riots in Gujarat. We then believe that some of that content was taken off Twitter. Was that at the behest of the Indian government?
I'm not aware of that particular situation. The rules in India for what can appear on social media are quite strict. And we can't go beyond the laws of a country.
But do you get that if you do that, you incentivize countries around the world to simply pass more draconian laws?
No. Look, if we have a choice of either our people go to prison or we comply with the laws, we will comply with the laws. The same goes for the BBC.
So TikTok has also been in the news. There's talk of perhaps the Biden administration wanting to potentially ban it or force a sale. What's your view of the situation?
I don't really use TikTok. I hear many people tell me they spent a lot of time on TikTok, but they regret the time spent. We want the time to be unregretted, where you learned things, you were entertained, amused. I mean, frankly, I get more laughs out of Twitter than anything else, and many people tell me the same thing. So that's a good sign. For TikTok itself, I can't say I have a strong opinion on TikTok.
So you'd have an opinion on whether it should be banned or not?
It would help Twitter, I suppose, if TikTok was banned, because then people would spend more time on Twitter and less time on TikTok. But even if it would help Twitter, I would be generally against banning of things.
Do you feel sometimes that your many business interests might get in the way of you having opinion? I mean, for example, Tesla has major connections in China.
Tesla's got activities around the world, and so does SpaceX. Once in a while, those things do come into conflict. But it's not like Twitter's operates in China. It doesn't. It was banned in China. And certainly I've received no communication whatsoever from the Chinese government with regard to Twitter.
In terms of advertising, have all the advertisers come back?
Not all, but most.
And
you can see it for yourself on Twitter, even in the For You feed.
Right. How is it going? Is Twitter in profit now?
No, Twitter is rough. I'd say we're roughly break even at this point.
And I think you've said before you see a world where you could be in profit. Is there a timeline on that, do you think?
Depending on how things go, if current trends continue, I think we could be profitable, I'd say, to be more precise, we could be cash flow positive this quarter if things keep going well.
And do you have a message for the advertisers? I mean, can you say which advertisers haven't come back?
I think almost all of them have either come back or said they're going to come back. If Disney feels comfortable advertising, children's movies, and Apple feels comfortable advertising iPhones, those are good indicators that Twitter is a good place to advertise.
Do you have any regrets buying Twitter?
I think it was something that needed to be done.
I mean, you said
it's
earlier
quite
that
difficult, you know. I'd say that like the pain level of Twitter has been extremely high. This hasn't been some sort of party, and but you know, all's well that ends well, and so I feel like we're headed to a good place. You know, we're roughly break even. I think we're trending towards being cash flow positive very soon. The advertisers are returning. I think the quality of recommended tweets has improved significantly. So overall, I think the trend is very good.
I think in February you said the last 3 months have been extremely tough. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. Can you just talk me through the emotional strain of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been under constant attack. I mean, it's not like I, you know, have a stone cold heart or something like that. You know, if you're under constant criticism and attack, and then that gets fed to you nonstop, including through Twitter, it's rough. So I think it is actually important to get negative feedback. I don't turn replies off, and I actually I removed my entire block list. So I don't block anyone either. It
feels like you have quite a kind of interesting relationship with the media, because in some ways you're quite skeptical, quite critical certainly of established media, but also you kind of get hurt by what the media writes, and you seem to. You do get your news still from the BBC, as you've already said. So
I literally follow the BBC on Twitter.
So do you feel you have a kind of odd relationship with the media?
Yes.
Go on, explain.
It is sort of part and parcel of having a free media situation, which is that you know, I do take heart in that the media is actually able to trash me on a regular basis in the United States, the UK, and whatnot. Whereas, you know, in a lot of other places, media cannot say mean things to powerful people.
Okay.
But I think it's better that we have a situation where the media can say mean things to powerful people.
Let's talk about verification labels. You obviously want to create another revenue stream that's subscription-based. Is verification the way to do that? Because we have a kind of a situation at the moment where the New York Times doesn't have a verified badge, whereas anyone else who can pay whatever few bucks a month can. Can that be right? Is that what you envisaged when you bought Twitter?
I must confess to some delight in removing the verified badge from the New York Times. That was great. Anyway, they're still alive and well.
But on a serious note, it could flame disinformation again if you have verified accounts that are from anyone who can pay money. They go up to potentially the top of feeds. They get more action on Twitter, and traditional media that may not pay for verification doesn't. Do you see how that could potentially be a driver of misinformation?
Well, I mean, I think the media is a driver of misinformation much more than the media would like to admit that they are.
I mean, that's a different question.
Yeah, but you are sort of saying like who knows best, the average citizen or, you know, someone who is a journalist. And I think in a lot of cases it is the average citizen that knows more than the journalist. So if you read an article about something you know about, how accurate is that article? Now imagine that is how essentially all articles are. They're an approximation of what's going on, but not an exact situation. So if somebody is actually, let's say, in the fray, or like an expert in the field, and was actually there, and writes about their experience of being actually there, I think that actually that's in a lot of cases going to be better than a journalist, because the journalist wasn't there.
But blue ticks, in theory, all legacy blue ticks gone next week. And at that point, you'll kind of work out whether this is going to sink or swim.
Yes.
What's your hunch? I mean, you've obviously.
I think it's going to swim.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll swim just fine.
Okay. What are you looking for in terms of a revenue stream on that? What are your goals?
I don't know if it's like necessarily a giant revenue stream. What we're really trying to do here with verification is to massively raise the cost of disinformation and bots in general. So my prediction is that any social media company that does not insist on paid verification will simply be overwhelmed by advanced AI bots.
But a lot of organizations have already said they're not going to pay, like the New York Times.
Well, then, that's up to them. So what we're not going to do is say that there's some anointed class of journalists who are the special ones who get to tell everyone what they should think. That it should be up to the people what they think. I'm hopeful that this can be more a case of the public choosing the narrative, as opposed to the media choosing narrative. And over time, I think if Twitter is the best source of truth, it will succeed. And if we are not the best source of truth, we will fail.
Someone comes in and offers you $44 billion for Twitter right now. Would you take it?
No.
Why?
I take it back. It depends on who. I suppose if I was confident that they would pursue, they would rigorously pursue the truth, then I guess I would be glad to hand it off to someone else. I don't care about the money really, but I do want to have some source of truth that I can count on.
You've said that you were going to stand down
I already have.
chief executive, right? Who would you want? Have you got a successor in mind?
Oh, not yet.
This office, are you thinking about moving out of San Francisco?
Not yet.
Or
We
might
tried
it-
to turn it into a homeless shelter, and the building management, the building owner rejected it. Because we're only using one of the buildings, and so the other building could be a homeless shelter.
What was your plan for the shelter?
I don't know. We could just let people stay there. It's nice.
What's the most difficult thing you've had to do? What's the hardest thing you've had to do as Twitter boss here, Twitter owner?
Well, shutting down one of our service centers was quite difficult because it turns out there were. I thought the service centers were redundant, but there were in fact a lot of things that were hard coded to this one service center, and so when we shut it down, we actually it was quite catastrophic. We lost a lot of functionality, which sort of really rushed to put it back.
And what about hard in terms of emotional? I mean, is letting go? I mean, what were the levels of staff, and what are they now?
Around 1,500 people at this point, and there was, I think, 800.
Has it been hard letting that many people go?
Yeah, not fun at all. It's painful.
The Nancy Pelosi tweet.
No, leave it alone.
The start.
Jesus.
But there have been, that is an example of a few, and there have been others. Do you feel like you're an impulsive person?
I mean, have I shot myself in the foot with tweets multiple times? Yes.
Do you feel like...
I need bulletproof shoes at this point.
You've definitely done that. The issue is that you're now a Twitter owner. Do you feel like you should look at your tweets more?
I think I should not tweet after 3 a.m.
But what are your Twitter rules? I mean, I've had some people say never tweet when you've been drinking, or never tweet when angry. What are your Twitter rules?
Well, I think those are two good rules. Yeah, don't tweet if you're wasted, or really upset about something. I mean, a good friend of mine actually had a good suggestion, and it has helped, which is that if you're going to tweet something that maybe is controversial, save it as a draft and look at it the next day and see if you still want to tweet it. And that has been a good rule of thumb.
Okay.
So I've got a bunch of things in my draft folder that I'm glad I didn't send.
This is my sort of wrapping up at this point. But yeah, do you have any regrets?
I mean, one can always like hindsight's 20/20, so that a bunch of decisions that could have been made better for sure. But as I said, all's well that ends well, and things are going pretty well.
I've spoken to lots of people who've been fired. So lots of people have been let go. I mean, you've gone from 8,000 to 15,000.
The censorship bureau was let go. I don't think people, the sort of putting a thumb on the political scales on the far left has been let go, because that's not right. That's not what you want for a public square. You've got to have equal treatment for people from across the political spectrum, and that the community notes feature is extremely powerful for addressing so-called misinformation.
I mean, you've had community notes placed on your own tweets.
Yes.
One of them involving an alleged diamond mine.
Diamond mine?
A mine that...
What diamond mine?
A mine that your father part-owned?
Yeah, my father never owned so you're thinking of an emerald mine?
Emerald mine.
He never owned a emerald mine. This is total bullshit.
So it's a really good example then, because there is a community note on that tweet that says, you said this thing on the X day, blah, blah, blah. So in that instance, the community notes didn't work. So you're saying that that's a way of solving misinformation, but you're literally saying one of those community notes is wrong.
If they're referencing an article, then the article may not be wrong, but they still represent. Anyway, the community notes is not going to be perfect, but it's the batting average of community notes I found to be extremely high. The acid test is people use the system and find it to be a good source of truth, or they don't. And no system is going to be perfect in its pursuit of the truth. But I think we can be the best, the least inaccurate. That's our goal, the least inaccurate.
Do you have a kind of message for people who think that Twitter has been ruined?
Well, we have all-time high usage, so I don't think it has been.